All right, everyone. Our next artist we're going to talk to this afternoon is guest artist Susan Denniston, who makes these wonderful pieces out of found textiles. And she's going to tell us a lot about her materials because they have a lot of meaning for her personally. And I'm really looking forward to her telling this story to all of us. So, Susan, your first piece is entitled What Lies Between, and I'd love for you to tell us a little bit about this piece.
Okay, first, before I talk about this, I wanted to thank Phyllis for inviting me to apply to be the guest artist. And I also wanted to thank all of the Kingston Gallery artists for following up and accepting me to show in this space. And I do think there's a rhythm and a correspondence between the three of us here. What I've done and do, quilts, old quilts, decaying quilts, quilts that have been mended and repaired, or first made by artists, I believe, maybe 100 years ago or more. And they've been repaired and mended, wrapped around people, keeping them warm, but now they're ready for the trash heap. And I've taken them apart and breaking the stitches and looking at what lies between. And what I found in one of them, surprisingly, was another quilt inside. So I took that apart too. That inside quilt, in this particular case, was the pattern called Evening Star. And as I printed from these by inking up the plate and putting the quilt piece against the plate, taking it apart and actually printing, I was surprised myself by the feeling of what it evoked for me. So maybe I'll back up. Diane said
no worries.
Talk about what this actually is. These are prints on paper, and so then I printed that on paper. And as I looked at them, I was surprised. It gave me the sense of either landscape or aerial views or the ocean encroaching upon the land. And also maybe of stars falling from the sky. And each one of them felt different to me. And I continued to respond to them and work with them, sometimes picking out the paper or picking out bits, scraping away so that there would be more white in the images. But I think what I was feeling and was left with was this evolution of how this quilt was made a number of years ago, many years ago, carefully by unrecognized, unnamed artists, and then used and had touched a lot of people and was mended and repaired and gave me the sense that there are a number of things we too need to repair with the way we view our land, with the question of whose land is this, and reconstructing and building new narratives.
I think that's really wonderful. Have you always worked with, I don't want to call them discarded, but gently used quilts and materials that are from the past, and always worked in textiles?
No. I had been in the medical software field for 20 plus years, but before then, as a child, my mother taught me to sew, and actually there's her sewing machine, a woodcut of her sewing machine. But so there was a sense of working with fabric, with fiber, but that sort of dropped away as I worked in the medical software field. And then in 2000, I left and started studying art, and initially was doing printmaking, learning about printmaking and painting, and worked with images of the seawall, which in my mind, it's a leap, but has some bearing on some of my thinking or motivation about how we watch things be destroyed and reconstructed as that seawall near where I live is destroyed constantly, rebuilt and destroyed again. And who do we think we are holding back the sea? I think we know who's going to win this one, but we still try. And so then I started working with fabric and fiber, more actually when the Bangladesh building factory, the clothing factory in Bangladesh collapsed about 10 years ago and came down and destroyed, killed 1,100 people or so. And that was when I started making a connection between me sewing with my mother and a number of most of the garment workers in Bangladesh seeking independence, but also probably working with their daughters too, and how different our experiences were. I'm not sure. So I haven't always worked with fabric or quilts, and I do feel like I come from a family of quilters, having a number of old family quilts.
Oh, that's wonderful. Where do you source them? Are they only your old family quilts, or are you wandering around and just?
I thought before I took apart some of these old family quilts, I should experiment. And actually, I think that was very rewarding to me and freeing. So I got a few on eBay, and actually, the ones I chose on eBay were the ones that were totally falling apart. Even one of the people who I had said, send me a couple of those quilts, and said, please be aware that these are not going to be usable, that they are falling apart. So that was what I was looking for. And it was very freeing to be able to gently break them apart and observe and see what was happening inside of them.
That's so wonderful, and I think the whole sense of community that you're talking about with the mothers and the generations, it reminds me of the women of Gee's Bend and hundreds, thousands of other women throughout history who have made things not only to keep their family warm, but also to express themselves and to make their homes more beautiful. So I love that you're doing honor to that work and taking it and reimagining it. One of the things that I'm curious about this piece is, why is it 9 small pieces making one whole piece?
It was 20 or 25 pieces.
Oh,
but,
okay.
in order to just have a reasonably sized collection of work. But perhaps, I hadn't really thought of it, perhaps it has this sense of a quilt put together in the squares.
It does, I think. It really does. And I love I love how you've honored the traditional quilt patterns, and even over here it has a more of a batik sort of African look to it too. It's really wonderful up in the upper right. So would you think that when you're doing your work, is it important for you because to me your prints are very textural, and is it important for you to have that texture of the fabric replicated in the print, or are you going for something else?
Well, I think both, the texture of the fabric and something else, seeing it transformed and reimagined, and asking myself what it makes me think of as I take this off of the press and look at it. So I'd say both. I value that apparent, clear texture from the inside of the quilt, but also enjoy thinking about what else I can do to it to transform it a little bit.
And do you have any specific thing that you want us as viewers, or anyone as viewers, to know and feel and think about when they see your work? What are you trying to express with it? Maybe you've already told us a lot about it, but is there anything that if I were to just walk in here off the street without your wonderful backstory, what would you want people to see and pay attention to?
I do think the viewer brings another dimension, and the viewer is required. And I feel like I do look forward to the viewer sitting with it and not really knowing immediately what they think, and being, if there's some interest, being compelled to sit and with it a little bit longer, and that it doesn't give itself up right away.
Wonderful. All right, so to Susan's right is our next piece, so we're not going to have to move very far this time. And this one has a wonderful title. Oh, sorry. I didn't mean to do that to you, put you in the frame. This one has a wonderful title, What Lies, no, I Miss You So Much, I Miss You So Much, and you've hung it in a really terrific way so that the viewer has a strong sense of the fabric and the way it moves, but I know that this piece is a very personal one to you, so I'd love for you to tell us about that.
Okay, actually, Diane, it's in a way, not totally, not literally a diptych, but first I made this print, or during COVID, towards the beginning of COVID, I had access to a friend's print studio while she was away, and was able to print for a week. And I took my grandmother's napkins that had been in the drawer, and for ages that I figured my daughter's not going to want them. So I took the napkins and started, which is what these are, I started folding them and printing from them, much as I printed from the inside of the quilts here. And felt like, and made several prints similar to this that gave me the sense of a curtain and hanging between us, between me and other members of my daughter and granddaughter who I couldn't see, that we were all eating alone, we remember. So after I printed a number of those, I started looking at the linens themselves and was really intrigued by the shapes that were on the linen. And to me it spoke of, so I sewed the 4 napkins together, and these were big napkins and had beautiful damask, the way the linen was woven. And just started looking at them, and it felt like they too, I'll interrupt myself, that's one thing I really like about art, is you just continue to surprises just unfold in front of you. So that's what I felt, was that this could be a piece on its own, and sew these together. And it's fortuitous serendipity that the ceiling was this height. I shot this one other time in a space that had very high ceiling, and so the full piece was just up against the wall. I feel like this is a beautiful way of hanging it because, as you see, it is free and can move, and also you see the back side more easily with just a shadow of the ink coming through the fabric, and see the damask that I think is delightful.
Now, you alluded to it a little bit, before when you were talking about the diptych nature of this, but one of the things the title talks about is missing people, and I would love for you to talk a little bit more about that, because I know it's wrapped up not only generationally, but also with the pandemic.
Right. I do feel that. I think maybe it speaks for itself, but it wasn't that long ago. We all remember how we were missing those opportunities to see our friends, see our family, just to eat together. And so in my mind, I started thinking more and thinking then about using my grandmother's linens, how that was symbolic of her having dinners with family and friends, and that's what we were not able to do. Right. So it did feel like, I miss you so much. Everybody, we understood what was going on.
That was a very hard time, and it's lovely to have such tender art come out of it. I think it's a tribute to you really honoring again the generational traditions among women and among families. So what I would really love to understand from you is sort of what your artistic influences are, because you talked a little bit about how you were doing painting, and do you have any particular movements or artists or anything, or are you an intuitive artist and you really just work with what you feel?
I feel I stand on the shoulders of giants. I like looking at and studying and trying to understand art of a variety of people, and appreciate all the people. One is here in Rhoda Rosenberg, but just learning about artists that I didn't really know about, and then a particular artist that probably no one knows of, but she is the one who started making me think about quilts, seeing an exhibit in North Carolina where she was taking apart quilts, and our work doesn't look anything alike. I started being initially just a little concerned that I don't want to be copying her, but it just took off. It was just seeing her work that inspired me to go with that idea and see where that took me.
I love it. That's wonderful.
What is that person's name? What is that person's name?
Rachel McGinnis.
All right, so we can all look her up when we leave today, because her work can't possibly be any more beautiful than yours. One last thing before we open it up for questions. You did one of the most brilliant things I've ever seen with the this panel here in the back that, because of the fire code, we can't cover, but you did a wonderful thing with it. So and you talked a little bit about it in one of your social media posts. So tell us about the kisses, please.
Well, yes, I had gotten the word. No, this panel is not to be covered. No. And Phyllis was asking, we were planning a little bit of what we would bring for the reception on opening night. And a few days earlier, a couple weeks earlier, I had said, I'll bring Hershey's Kisses. It's Valentine's this month. Mm-hmm. And then it was only, whichever it was, Friday morning of the opening, that I said, I know what I'm gonna do with those kisses and that door. And there they are. And if you don't know him, look up Felix Gonzalez Torres, who also is an interesting artist who knows whether I would have found him on my own, but just this art world that opened up in the past, well, since 2000. But it was just, I just thought, I don't know, genius, but it was only came at that moment to put the Hershey's Kisses up there. And if you don't know of his work, look it up. It's very emotional and significant, and this is just playful.